I was 22 years old, sitting on the floor of a studio apartment I'd rented for $730 a month because it was the cheapest thing within 40 minutes of my office, eating a bowl of rice and black beans I'd made in a pot I bought at Goodwill for $3, checking my brokerage account on my phone for the fourth time that week. The number said $61,412. I looked around the apartment. The furniture was secondhand. The couch had a tear in the left cushion that I'd covered with a throw blanket from Target. The TV was a 32-inch Vizio I'd bought refurbished for $89. My car, a 2014 Honda Civic with 117,000 miles, sat outside with a small crack in the windshield I'd been ignoring for 2 months. My wardrobe consisted almost entirely of clothes I'd owned since college. My friends thought I was broke. I was not broke. I was building something they couldn't see, something that didn't exist on Instagram, something that lived in an account nobody knew about, growing at a rate that was just starting to bend upward on the compounding curve, gaining momentum that would become unstoppable within a few years. By the time I turned 24, that number crossed $100,000. I need to be upfront about something before we go any further. I didn't inherit this money. Nobody handed me a check. I didn't win a crypto lottery or sell a startup. I graduated college with about $9,000 in student debt and a starting salary of $52,000 at a job I got through a career fair. My parents helped with college tuition partially, which I'm grateful for, but they didn't fund my adult life. There was no trust fund, no safety net, no family money quietly compounding in the background. What I had was 20 habits, 20 boring, unsexy, completely unglamorous habits that most people my age were either ignoring or actively laughing at. Habits that didn't look like wealth building from the outside because they looked like deprivation. Like I was struggling. Like I was the friend who couldn't afford to keep up. I could afford to keep up. I chose not to. And that choice, repeated 20 different ways every single day for roughly 2.5 years, is the reason I hit a number that the average American in their 20s has a median retirement savings balance of $42,502 to show for, according to Empower data from January 2026. I hit that number before most of my peers had finished paying off their first credit card. This is not financial advice. This is my story. These are the 20 habits. Every single one of them is something you could start this week with whatever income you currently have. Let's get into it. I automated my investments the day after every paycheck, before I could see the money. This was habit number 1, and it was the foundation underneath everything else. On the 15th and the 30th of every month, $750 left my checking account, automatically, and went into a combination of my employer's 401k and a Roth IRA. I set it up during my first week at work, and I never changed the amount until I got my first raise, at which point I increased it. I never saw that money. It never entered my spending reality. My brain learned to live on what remained, which was roughly $2,100 a month after taxes, rent, and the automatic transfers. The Vanguard 2025 How America Saves report found that 401k participants who use automatic enrollment and automatic escalation reach savings rates nearly double those who manage contributions manually. Automation isn't a convenience. It's the mechanism. It removes the decision, and decisions are where most people fail. I tracked every dollar I spent in a notebook, not an app. A physical notebook. Every night before bed, I sat down for about 5 minutes and wrote down what I'd spent that day and which category it fell into. Needs, wants, bills. This sounds obsessive. It felt obsessive for the first 2 weeks. After that, it became automatic. The act of writing forced my brain to consciously process each purchase twice, once when I made it and once when I recorded it. By the end of the first month, I'd identified over $300 in spending I genuinely did not realize I was doing. Subscription charges I'd forgotten, vending machine purchases, a $4 sparkling water habit at the gas station that was costing me roughly $80 a month. People who track spending save 15 to 20% more than people who don't, according to multiple behavioral finance studies. The notebook cost me $3. It saved me thousands. I cooked almost every meal at home and batch cooked on Sundays. Sunday afternoons, I'd spend about 2 hours making 3 large meals: a big pot of chili or soup, a sheet pan of roasted chicken and vegetables, a batch of rice with whatever protein was on sale. These 3 meals covered roughly 12 to 14 of my weekly meals. The remaining meals were eggs, sandwiches, oatmeal, or leftovers from a slightly more ambitious weeknight dinner. My average monthly grocery bill was about $220. The average American spends roughly $350 to $400 on groceries per person, and another $300 to $400 on dining out and delivery. My total food cost was about half what most people my age spent. The savings were roughly $250 to $300 a month compared to my peers. That's $3,000 a year, redirected to investments. At 8% over 30 years, those Sunday cooking sessions are worth roughly $367,000. I kept my rent below 25% of my take-home pay. Every personal finance source says 30%. I aimed for 25. My take-home was about $2,850 after taxes and before my automated investments. 25% of that is roughly $712. I found the studio for $730, which was $18. Over my target, I took it because it was clean, safe, and close enough to work that my commute was short. My friends were paying $1,100 to $1,400 for nicer places in trendier neighborhoods. The monthly gap between my rent and the average rent my friend group paid was roughly $500. $500 a month. Invested at 8% over 20 years, that's roughly $295,000. My apartment didn't have granite countertops or in-unit laundry. It had a working stove and a door that locked. Those were the requirements. Everything else was a premium I refused to pay. I drove a used car I bought with cash and maintained religiously. The 2014 Civic cost me $8,200 from a private seller I found on Facebook Marketplace. I had it inspected by a mechanic before buying, which cost $75 and saved me from 2 other cars that had hidden problems. I changed the oil every 5,000 miles, rotated the tires twice a year, replaced the air filter when it needed it. The total annual maintenance cost averaged about $600. I had 0 car payment. The average new car payment hit $767 a month at the end of 2025, according to Experian. That means the average American is spending over $9,000 a year just on the payment alone, not including insurance, gas, and maintenance on a more expensive vehicle. My total annual car cost, including insurance, gas, and maintenance, was about $3,400. The typical new car owner's total cost easily exceeds $14,000. The difference of roughly $10,600 a year invested is worth approximately $1.29 million over 30 years at 8%. My car had a crack in the windshield and a faded dashboard. It also had 4 wheels and an engine that started every morning. That's all a car needs to do. I use the library for books, movies, and audiobooks instead of buying or subscribing. My local library gave me free access to thousands of books, DVDs, and through the Libby app, a massive catalog of audiobooks and ebooks I could listen to during my commute. I read roughly 2 books a month this way. The average reader who buys their books spends about $250 to $400 a year. I spent 0. Beyond the cost savings, the library habit changed my relationship with consumption in general. When you learn that you can access something without owning it, you start questioning the entire premise of ownership across other categories too. I made coffee at home 5 days a week and treated myself to 1 bought coffee on Fridays. The Friday coffee was my ritual. I looked forward to it all week. It costs $5.50 from a local shop. That's roughly $22 a month on coffee. The average daily coffee buyer spends $6 a day, 5 days a week, which is $1,560 a year. My annual coffee cost was about $290, including the beans I bought for home. The savings of roughly $1,270 a year isn't life-changing in isolation, but it's $1,270 that compounds. Over 20 years at 8%, it's about $62,000. From making coffee in a $12 French press every morning, I never paid for a gym membership. I ran outside. I did bodyweight exercises in my apartment using a free YouTube program. I bought a used pull-up bar from Craigslist for $15 and a jump rope for $8. My total fitness investment was $23. The average gym membership costs $40 to $60 a month. Most gym members use their membership 4 to 5 times a month, which means each visit costs $8 to $15. I worked out 5 to 6 days a week for free. The $60 a month I saved went directly to my Roth IRA. That's $720 a year. At 8% over 25 years, it's roughly $55,000. A pull-up bar, a jump rope, and a running path are worth $55,000 in future wealth. Nobody at the gym is running those numbers on the treadmill. I negotiated every recurring bill at least once a year. Car insurance, phone plan, internet. I called each provider, told them I was considering switching, and asked what they could offer to keep me. Consumer Reports found that 70% of people who do this get a reduction. I got reductions on all 3 in my first year. Combined annual savings, about $480. The calls took less than 30 minutes total. That's roughly $960 an hour in effective earnings, tax-free. No side hustle pays that well for that little effort. I used cash for all discretionary spending. Every 2 weeks, I withdrew $200 in cash. That was my entire budget for dining out, entertainment, personal items, and anything that wasn't a fixed bill. When the cash was gone, I was done until the next paycheck. No exceptions. This was brutally effective because physical money triggers the brain's pain of paying response in a way that swiping a card never does. Research consistently shows that people spend 12 to 18% less when using cash. The envelope was my governor. It didn't let me overspend because it physically couldn't. The discipline wasn't willpower. It was architecture. I bought almost everything secondhand. Furniture, kitchen supplies, clothes for casual wear. Electronics when possible. My entire apartment was furnished for under $900 through Goodwill, Facebook Marketplace, and a moving sale from a neighbor who was relocating. My coworker furnished a similar-sized apartment at West Elm and IKEA for about $6,300. Went straight to my brokerage account the month I moved in. One purchase, one decision, $5,400 immediately at work. I practiced the 24-hour rule on every purchase over $30. See something I want? Wait 1 day. If I still wanted it 24 hours later, I bought it. If I forgot about it, I didn't. This eliminated roughly 60 to 70% of my impulse purchases. Americans spend an average of $282 a month on impulse buys, according to Capital One shopping data. My impulse spending averaged about $40 to $60 a month. The difference is roughly $220 a month, or $2,640 a year. The 24-hour rule costs nothing. It requires no willpower in the moment because the decision is deferred, not denied. By the time the 24 hours pass, the emotional urgency has almost always evaporated. I unsubscribed from every marketing email the moment it arrived. Every promotional email is a trigger designed by a team of psychologists and data scientists to make you spend money you weren't planning to spend. I treated each one as an attack on my financial goals. Unsubscribe, delete. Gone. Within 3 months, my inbox was clean and my exposure to purchase triggers dropped by roughly 80%. You can't buy what you don't see. Removing the temptation is infinitely easier than resisting it. I deleted shopping apps from my phone. Amazon, Target, every retailer. If I needed something, I had to open my laptop, log in through a browser, and navigate to the site manually. That friction, those extra 30 seconds of effort, eliminated roughly 40% of my online purchases. The purchases I did make were intentional. They were planned. I never bought anything from a push notification again. But let me pause here because I want to address something I know is sitting in the back of some of your minds. This sounds extreme. It sounds like I spent 2 years as a hermit, eating rice and beans in a dark apartment while my friends lived their lives. That's not what happened. I went to dinner with friends. I just went once or twice a month instead of 4 times a week. And I chose the $14 entree instead of the $38 one. I traveled. I took a road trip to the Smoky Mountains that cost me $312 total, including gas, a campsite, and food. I had hobbies. I played basketball at the park. I cooked elaborate meals on weekends as a creative outlet. I read constantly. I hiked. I had a full, engaged, genuinely enjoyable life. The difference between my life and my peers' lives wasn't the quality of the experiences. It was the cost. I found the cheap version of every good thing and discovered that the cheap version was usually just as good, sometimes better, because it came without the financial anxiety that follows a $700 weekend you put on a credit card you can't pay off. I used my employer's 401k match completely from day one. My company matched 100% of the first 3% and 50% of the next 2%. On my $52,000 salary, contributing 5% meant I got an additional $2,600 a year from my employer. Free money. I was 22 years old, and my employer was handing me $2,600 annually that required nothing from me except checking a box and selecting a contribution percentage. 88% of 401k participants received an employer match in the fourth quarter of 2025, according to Fidelity. The ones who didn't contribute enough to capture the full match were declining compensation. I wasn't going to be one of them. I opened a Roth IRA in my first month of working and contributed monthly. In 2026, the annual Roth IRA limit is $7,500. I contributed roughly $625 a month, pulling from the automatic transfer I'd set up on payday. The money went into a low-cost total stock market index fund with an expense ratio of 0.03%. I didn't pick stocks. I didn't time the market. I didn't follow crypto influencers or meme stock forums. I bought the entire market every month, regardless of what the market was doing, and I let compound interest handle the rest. Dollar cost averaging into an index fund is the single most boring and most effective wealth building strategy available to an ordinary person. It requires no expertise, no timing, and no emotional intelligence. It requires a brokerage account and a monthly transfer. I kept my phone for 3.5 years instead of upgrading every cycle. I used a phone I bought refurbished for $260. It made calls. It sent texts. It ran every app I needed. It did not have the latest camera module or the newest chip that benchmark reviewers get excited about. Over 3.5 years, I saved roughly $4,000 to $7,000 compared to someone upgrading annually on a payment plan. The phone industry's entire business model depends on convincing you that last year's device is inadequate. It almost never is. My $260 phone did everything a $1,200 phone would have done. The only difference was bragging rights I didn't need and a camera zoom level I would have used 3 times. I said no to things I wanted but didn't need. This was the hardest habit, harder than cooking at home, harder than driving the old car, harder than living in the small apartment. Because the things I said no to weren't bad decisions. They were genuinely appealing opportunities that I could technically afford. A trip to Austin with friends, a concert I really wanted to attend, a leather jacket I tried on at a store and stood in front of the mirror for 5 minutes, genuinely considering. Each time I ran the math, not just the sticker price, the shadow price, the compounding cost. The $280 concert ticket isn't $280 at 22. At 8% over 40 years, it's roughly $6,100. I'm not saying every concert is a bad decision. I'm saying I became very selective about which experiences were worth $6,000 of future wealth. Most of them weren't. The ones that were, I attended fully and without guilt because I knew I'd evaluated the trade honestly. I used high-yield savings for my emergency fund instead of a regular account. This sounds minor. It isn't. High-yield savings accounts in 2026 are paying roughly 4 to 5% APY. The national average on a traditional savings account is 0.39%. On a $5,000 emergency fund, that's the difference between earning $200 and $19 a year. Same money, same liquidity, same protection. I just put it in a different container. Over the 2.5 years of this journey, the high-yield interest earned me roughly an extra $450 that a regular savings account would not have generated. Small amounts matter when they compound. I set a zero-based budget every single month. Every dollar had a job before the month started. Rent, $730, groceries, $220, gas, $70, insurance, $118, phone, $35, internet, $45, cash envelope, $200, investments, $1,500. Everything else was allocated down to zero. If there were leftover dollars, they went to investments. If an unexpected expense hit, I adjusted within the budget by pulling from another category. The budget wasn't a restriction. It was a map. Without it, money wanders. With it, money obeys. I found free entertainment as my default and treated paid entertainment as the exception. Parks, hiking trails, library events, friends' apartments for movie nights, pickup basketball, community concerts in the summer, free museum days. Podcast walks. The idea that fun requires spending money is one of the most expensive assumptions in American culture. It's false. The best evenings of my early 20s happened in living rooms with friends, homemade food, and a deck of cards. The worst evenings happened at overcrowded bars where I spent $80 to have conversations I couldn't hear. Once I started treating free entertainment as the default, paid entertainment became genuinely special instead of reflexive. I enjoyed a $30 dinner more when it happened once a month than I ever enjoyed it when it happened 3 times a week. I invested every windfall, tax refund, birthday money, the occasional freelance check from a skill I had. Every dollar that arrived outside of my regular paycheck went directly to my brokerage account. I didn't treat it as bonus money. I treated it as accelerant. My tax refund in my first full year of working was about $1,900. That went straight to investments. Birthday money from relatives totaled about $300 across a year. Straight to investments. A freelance project paid me $600. Behavioral economists call the tendency to categorize unexpected money differently from earned money mental accounting. A dollar from your tax refund spends exactly like a dollar from your paycheck. It compounds exactly the same way, too. The only difference is that you feel permission to spend one and guilt about spending the other. I eliminated the distinction. All money was investment fuel. Let me tell you where the $100,000 came from, broken down, because I think the transparency matters. Over roughly 2.5 years of working, here's what the accumulation looked like. My 401k contributions plus employer match totaled approximately $31,000. My Roth IRA contributions totaled approximately $15,000. Additional brokerage investments from windfall money and extra savings totaled approximately $16,000. Market returns across all accounts during that period added roughly $12,000. My high-yield emergency fund and savings sat at roughly $7,000. Cash I'd accumulated from various sales and side income contributed about $4,000. The remaining balance came from the compounding of all contributions during the period. Total invested plus saved plus market returns equaled approximately $100,800 at age 24. 90% of that number came directly from the habits I just described. Not from a high salary, not from a lucky stock pick, not from timing the market. From cooking rice and beans on Sundays, from driving a car with a cracked windshield, from living in a studio apartment while my friends leased 2 bedrooms in the trendy part of town, from saying no to Austin, from making coffee in a French press, from tracking every dollar in a $3 notebook. These habits are not impressive individually. A few dollars here, a few dollars there. Nobody looks at a person packing their lunch and thinks they're building generational wealth. Nobody sees a refurbished phone and assumes the person holding it has a 6-figure investment account. Nobody drives past a 2014 Civic in a parking lot and thinks that person is going to be a millionaire. But that's exactly the point. Wealth is invisible. The person driving the leased BMW looks rich. The person in the Civic might actually be rich. The person ordering the $38 entree looks successful. The person who ordered the $14 pasta and invested the difference is building something the entree buyer will never understand until it's too late. Here's what $100,000 at 24 actually means. And this is the part that makes every boring habit on this list worth it. $100,000 at $24 invested in a total market index fund earning 10% average annual returns becomes roughly $3.4 million by 65. Without adding another cent, just from existing, just from compounding. The 100,000 was the seed. Time is the soil. The 3.4 million is the tree. But I didn't stop contributing at 24. Nobody does. If I continue investing even $500 a month from 24 to 65, at 10%, the additional contributions alone generate roughly $3.6 million. Combined with the original 100,000, my total portfolio at 65 is in the range of $7 million. $7 million. From rice and beans, a used Civic, a studio apartment, a $3 notebook, and 20 habits that nobody on Instagram would ever photograph. The average retirement savings for Americans in their 20s is a median of $42,502. According to Empower data, the average for Americans in their 60s is a median of $536,748. That median 60-year-old has spent 40 years working and has about $500,000 to show for it. I had $100,000 at 24. The compounding curve doesn't care about your salary. It cares about when you started and how much you fed it. 20 boring habits fed it enough to change the math permanently. I want to be clear about something. These habits aren't for everyone in their exact form. You might not be able to live on $2,100 a month. You might have student loans that demand a larger portion of your income. You might live in a city where $730 doesn't rent a closet, let alone a studio. The specific numbers are mine. The principles are universal. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference automatically. Track everything, eliminate financial friction that works against you. Introduce friction that works for you. Say no to things that cost more in compounded future dollars than they're worth in present enjoyment. Say yes to the habits that feel small today and become enormous over time. The personal savings rate in America sits at about 4.4% as of early 2026, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. That means the average American keeps 4.5 cents of every after-tax dollar. I was keeping roughly 45 to 50% during those 2.5 years. The distance between 4% and 50% isn't a salary gap. It's a behavior gap. The behaviors are the 20 things I just listed. Not one of them required earning more money. They required spending less of it and redirecting the difference toward a brokerage account that did the actual wealth building while I slept. More than half of Americans can't cover an unexpected $1,000 expense without borrowing, according to Bankrate's 2025 Emergency Savings Report. I built a $7,000 emergency fund on a $52,000 salary while simultaneously investing $1,500 a month. The emergency fund wasn't extra. It was baked into the system. Habit number 20, the zero-based budget, made sure every dollar had a job, and one of those jobs was protecting me from the kind of financial shock that derails most people's wealth-building trajectory permanently. There's a moment I think about often. It was about 14 months into this journey. I was at a birthday dinner for a friend. Everyone was ordering cocktails and appetizers. I ordered water and the cheapest entree. My friend leaned over and said, half joking, half serious, "Are you okay? Do you need money?" She genuinely thought I was struggling. I had more invested at that moment than anyone at the table, possibly more than several of them combined. I didn't correct her. I didn't pull up my brokerage app and prove anything. I just smiled and said I was good, because the thing about building wealth quietly is that you don't need anyone to know. The account balance is the validation. The compounding curve is the applause. The 20 habits are the performance, and the audience is just you, checking the numbers once a quarter, watching the curve start to bend, knowing that every boring decision you made is stacking on top of every other boring decision. In a way that will produce results most people call lucky when they finally see them. They're not lucky. They're the predictable mathematical consequence of 20 small behaviors repeated daily for a very long time. This brings me to something I think about constantly. These 20 habits worked because I learned why they worked, not just what to do. Packing a lunch saves money. Everyone knows that. But understanding that the $12 daily difference between packed and purchased invested at 8% for 40 years, is worth roughly $142,000. That understanding changes the behavior permanently. You don't need willpower to pack a lunch when you know the lunch is worth $142,000. The knowledge does the work that discipline can't sustain. That knowledge has a name: financial literacy. It's the understanding of compound interest that makes the automatic transfer feel urgent instead of optional. It's the understanding of opportunity cost that makes the BMW feel expensive instead of aspirational. It's the understanding of how money moves through a life over decades that transforms 20 small habits from a list of sacrifices into a wealth-building machine. Without financial literacy, these habits are chores. Things a YouTube video told you to do. Things you'll try for 3 weeks and abandon because they feel pointless when you can't see the curve yet. With financial literacy, they're inevitable. You do them because the math is so clear, so overwhelming, so obviously in your favor that not doing them would feel insane. I hit 100,000 at 24. The habits got me there. The literacy made the habits possible. Both were learned. Neither was inherited, and neither requires a salary above the one you already have. But here's the thing I wish someone had told me at 22 before I started. The habits that build wealth in your 20s are specific to your 20s. The financial traps that threaten a 22-year-old are different from the ones that threaten a 34-year-old, which are different from the ones waiting at 45 and 57. Every decade of your financial life carries its own set of decisions that feel rational in the moment and cost you enormously over time. Lifestyle inflation after your first real raise, the car upgrade when you feel like you deserve it, the house purchase that stretches your budget because the bank said you qualified, the undersaving in your peak earning years because expenses for kids and mortgages consumed everything. Each age has a specific trap. Each trap has a specific cost. Knowing what those traps look like before you arrive at the age where they're waiting is the difference between a person who hits 100,000 at 24 and keeps building for the next 40 years, and a person who hits 100,000 at 24 and watches it evaporate by 35 because they walked into every trap their 30s had waiting for them. The 20 habits were the beginning. Knowing the map of what comes next is what keeps the curve bending. The number in my account at 24 wasn't the destination. It was the first mile of a very long road. The road has turns. It has traps. It has off-ramps that look appealing and lead nowhere. The people who stay on the road are the ones who can see the turns coming before they arrive. I couldn't see them at 22. I can see them now. That's the only difference that ever mattered.